Hello, this is Angela with Park Rose Permaculture. Welcome back to part 3 of my June 2020 comprehensive food forest tour. If you are just tuning in, I will have the links to part 1 and 2 in the description. So I'm in Zone 8B in Portland, Oregon, and I have 1/4 acre and an 11-year-old food forest system. I've been in permaculture for 23 years, and my heart is really in regenerative agriculture. So we have lived in rural areas and we've lived in the Midwest, and where we ended up, I only have a 1/4 acre to work with, which is a big plot for being in the city, but overall is not a big plot. So I'm cramming everything in here. So I did a tour of the front yard and the side yard, and I want to get you into the beginning of the backyard. I'm a big fan of the concept of garden rooms, which garden designer P. Allen Smith introduced me to that concept 20-something years ago. I really like the feel of walking from one section into another. And in permaculture, there's the concept of zones, which in some ways is like that garden room concept. A little bit different bent on it. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit today as we move from the side yard and this apple guild here. We walk under my Valkenblau rose, which my roses are all real struggly right now because we've had very heavy rain for a long time. And so some of my roses are showing the impact of that. So as we move through this arch here, we come out into what is called a sun trap. So let me first say that we have several construction projects going on. While the garden is 11 years old, it is constantly being upgraded, and we're constantly adding things and improving. Just like in nature, succession means that new plants and new things are moving into an environment. In permaculture, you utilize succession in a designed way in which humans foster or force or push that succession. This is the beginning of an outdoor kitchen. Because of lockdown, I can't get the refractory brick pieces I need to finish the rocket stove that's going to go in the back of this stove and fuel a double oven and the top of this. So that is on hold for right now. But eventually we're going to have an outdoor kitchen for a lot of reasons, so that I can have friends and neighbors over to bake bread outside, so that I can cook outdoors in the summer, so that we can utilize all of our prunings, which I'll pan over here. This is just a tiny, tiny bit of them. There's our woodshed. I save all of my prunings, and that's really good for fuel for a rocket stove. Rocket stove runs on twigs and small pieces of wood. So that way nothing is wasted. So that's the beginning of that. In permaculture, like I said, we talk about zones, and zone, well, basically 0 and 1 is in your house and straight at the back door or the front door. And in zone 1, you tend to think about keeping things that you use or need to visit every day or multiple times a day. And for most people, that means that their zone 1 contains their veggie garden. Sometimes it contains their chickens or their rabbits. For me, my design is a little bit different, and that's because of the necessity of the way I need to capture water here and deal with some other issues. So you can see folks getting entrenched in these zones 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, where 1 is, again, that highly intensive, I need to visit it every day or multiple times a day, like my herb beds or strawberry patch or things like that. And then zone 5 is all the way into wilderness, where you don't visit it at all or once a year. And that would be like your wood lot, where you might go harvest wood out of it, or it's completely wild and you never visit it. I can see folks sometimes get real entrenched in those need for their zones. And I want to encourage you, in a permaculture setting, in a small amount of land, an urban or suburban permaculture setting, those zones sometimes need to look really different, and they also don't necessarily end at your property line. So for me, my zone 5 is going to be some of the wilderness areas in my community, but I'm not able to house them on my property. So when we think about suburban and urban permaculture, we're thinking about really extending our concept of where our zones are and where our permaculture exists beyond just the property that we own. Okay, so here's how some of my property here in this part of the garden doesn't match that typical zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to move over here. It has been raining and I'm going to get wet coming through these plants. Okay, this is my rain garden, which again, it's been raining really heavily, so some things have been knocked down. I'm going to step through these Oregon iris here, which are a little bit out of control, and show you. So we have a pergola off the back of the house here. And it's quite large, and it captures a ton of water. And I didn't want to put in gutters, and I didn't want to put in rain barrels, because in Oregon, it rains 9 months out of the year, in my part of Oregon. And our rain barrels would fill up with one storm, and then they would not need to be emptied for 9 months. It doesn't make sense to do rain barrels here, for the most part. So, this pergola faces straight north. So right now we're looking straight north. And that meant that this is very shaded, and because of the house directly behind me. So it didn't work to do my annual veggies right here because there isn't enough sun most of the time. And then also that rainwater capture meant that this area is often too wet. So what I have here, I have a video on my rain garden, and I'm going to do an update later this year, is a deep bed that we dug here that is filled with gravel. And it flows downhill this way and overflows into my veggie beds. And for us, yes, this is right at the back door. And yes, this is an area that only needs to be tended a couple of times a year, really. Although I do grow a lot of herbs here that I use. So ideally, this is really more like a zone 3, 4, but when you live in a urban or suburban setting, you often need a rain garden right off the house for rainwater, to deal with rainwater, especially here in Oregon. And so you find that that ends up being in your zone 1. And for me, I really enjoy this. This is full of pollinators and hummingbirds in the morning. And I love hearing the rain come off of it and filter in through the gravel. And this serves as a giant tank in the ground to store my water. So while it's in my zone 1, I don't want to be restricted by those permaculture zones. And permaculture is about designing for your site. It's about good design and what will work well for your site. And so I don't want to be too rigorous or too, what's the word I'm looking for? Restrictive, too pedantic, too legalistic in my thinking about my zones if they are just really not going to meet the needs of my system, right? I'm utilizing my zones so that I can have a better and more effective garden. I am not making my garden fit the zones, even if that doesn't work. So in this bed, I have a lot of herbs and a lot of perennials. So again, we've had heavy rain and it's knocked things down. So this right here is all gravel. It leads to an overflow here with more buried gravel that leads down into my annual beds. And in this, I grow things that like a lot of water on the inside, and on the outside berm, I grow things that don't need water. So I don't ever water this bed, obviously. So on the inside, I have things like Japanese iris that like wet feet. And on the outside, I have things like echinacea, or right here I have an aster. This is aster munch, which is Freikart's aster, which is a great aster for late season. This also, by the way, is the only place in the garden I really get weeds. And by weeds, I mean grass. I get a little quack grass in here and I have to pull it up. Okay, so this is my rain garden. Not your typical zone 1. It serves a great purpose of rainwater capture off of this big pergola here and storing it in the ground. So that's saving me work. I don't have to deal with gutters. I don't have to deal with puddles of water. It's all right here. Okay. moving on. So we're looking back through this arch that we came through. This is our free pallet shed. My husband and friend built it. It is free scrounged stuff. Industrial oak pallets are very hard to build with because they're very hard, but they hold up forever. So this shed, again, my roses are struggling a little bit because of the heavy rain. There's a lilac next to it, and this shed stores all my tools and garden supplies and straw and things like that. But you can see off the back of it, is a sloped roof. So in permaculture, we want to stack functions, and stacking functions means everything in the garden needs more than one job, if possible. And for me, in a small space, I really need my structures and my plants to do double, triple duty, if possible. So right here, and then you can't see behind the potatoes, there's a clawfoot bathtub on the other side of those daylilies, and that fills with rainwater, and the ducks bathe in that. And then I can pull the plug when it gets real gross, full of duck poop, and then that rich nitrogenous water full of duck poop flows downhill through my orchard and feeds my orchard. So that's good permaculture design. It's all no work for me. The only work I have to do is reach in and pull the plug, let it drain, put the plug back, and I get free duck pond, free fertilizer water for my trees. Gravity moves the water around. So as we're moving on from these kind of structural elements, when we talked about zones, so my shed is going to be somewhere I don't visit every day, but I wanted it close to the house so that I could access things easily. So if things are within close reach of the house, those are places that you're going to visit more. That's just the logic of permaculture. So here we have my annual veggie beds. And again, when we first began, the whole garden was annual veggie beds. And I slowly cycled in perennials. You can see the rain has caused my potatoes to really go gangbusters, and I need to mulch them again. I really like La Rata potatoes. They are a French fingerling potato. They do incredibly well. I usually grow also some blue potatoes and some Yukon Golds, but La Rata I think is a fantastic potato. So my annual veggie beds, these are just expressly for herbs and veg and flowers. And it doesn't mean that's the only place that I grow those things, but let me back up here. As we're looking into my garden, so again, this is straight north. Around the edge of my garden, you saw in the front yard was all food forest. You saw the apple guild here in the side yard. Here's my shed. And then this here is all an orchard in the back of my property. This is where my tall fruit trees and nut trees live, okay? And then right here we get a little break as we go into the woodshed, and then more orchard around that way, which I'll show you in an upcoming video. So when we design in permaculture, when we're capturing and storing energy, that's a principle in permaculture, catch and store energy. I really like utilizing in a small yard the concept of a sun trap, which is the sun comes in this way. So you put things around the perimeter and in the back that are very tall. And in the middle, you are catching that sun. And that is a great spot to put your annual veggies, tomatoes, peppers, tomatillos, physalis, things that need a lot of sun, full sun. You plant them in the middle of this sun trap. So while it is not right out my back door, it's still technically a zone 1 and zone 2. I visit it every day. And I find that this is really a successful system. And because I have the overflow from my rain garden designed, let me come up here a little bit and show you. The hose is out, by the way, not because I water my plants, but because my dogs like to play in the sprinkler. So that's pretty much, other than my kids loading up their squirt guns and the dogs playing in the sprinkler, I don't use the hose. Oh, that's not true. Sometimes, if it's very hot out, I put the sprinkler down in the orchard for the ducks to play in because they also love the sprinkler. So, okay, so as we're moving down here, these beds are designed with swales. So they are kidney-shaped beds. It's really hard to see because they're so full of plants. But there's 3 kidney-shaped beds here and 3 kidney-shaped beds with a path down the middle. And those beds, like I said, are built up with swales, so the paths are very deep mulch. And there's overflows, so the water can run basically like out of the rain garden. It runs down here. The overflow goes and feeds into this bed and the overflow into that bed. So there is a slight downhill slope here. So that helps me deal with excessive water runoff so I don't end up with muddy puddles at the back of my house. And it helps me water my plants more. If you notice, my veggie beds are full of veg, but also lots of green living mulches. And I talk about that in some of my other videos. And then here you can see also chop and drop. So this tomato is getting a little bit too shaded by some of the herbs and things here. So I just pulled them all up and threw them back on the bed. So that way I reduce water loss, conserving water for those 3 months of the year we don't get any rain. And then the rest of the year dealing with excessive water and helping it flow slowly downhill. So these annual beds, like I said, they get intense sun. This is a great spot for them. It's hard for me as somebody who really loves the concept of a food forest to have a big open, or forest gardening, to have a big open area for annuals. And it works for us, but I'm so tempted all the time to put in perennials in these spots. Here, this is a bed that was all annuals and still has annuals in it, but I'm starting to put in perennials. Oh, also, I've talked about this in previous videos. People in permaculture can be, again, like a little pedantic, like a little legalistic. And some folks are really opposed to the concept of a straight row. There's a little Hummer in my yard. A little female Anna's. I don't know if you can see it. So for me, I'm not opposed to using straight rows if I know what I'm doing with them and they're there with a purpose. When we think about pathways, we want to think about how the water flows through those paths and runoff, but we also want to think about pathways that get us to where we need to go or take us by things we need to go by. And I'll explain what I mean in just a moment. Here, I got a bunch of alpaca fleece from a friend, and some of it was not good enough quality to use for spinning or even really like weaving rugs. So I used it as mulch around my pumpkins. So that will then get wood chips on top of it. But that's not a resource that was going to go to waste just because it wasn't a quality high enough for me to use for spinning. So I have this straight path here and it takes me back to the grapes and the asparagus. And I needed this straight path. Like I needed a quick way to get down and pick grapes. I can't actually get into the chicken coop there because there is a run, and I'll get to that in a later video. There's a fence there. And I have this path over here that goes straight down to this gate. And on the other side of that gate is the duck house. And for me, because I'm visiting the ducks and chickens at least twice a day, I needed that straight path. And it also takes me past my veggies. So then I'm passing through my vegetable bed on my way to visit my poultry. And I'm looking at the health of my plants, and I'm weeding, and I'm picking things that are ripe. So this part of the garden, while I do have a food forest, and there is still room for basically like a potager, right? Like an open, sunny annual veggie bed. There's room for a rain garden, which in many ways mimics a meadow. I have a lot of meadow plants in here, as well as captures water for me. So that's this portion of the garden. Now, I know I promised you I would talk about my bees and my chickens and stuff, and I didn't get to that in this video, but we're already running about 20 minutes, so I will save that for tomorrow's installment, and I will start in on the orchard. So now we have covered the front yard food forest, the side yard garden along my property line with my neighbor. Now we've covered the rain garden, the beginning of a summer kitchen, and my annual veggie beds. And in the next few videos, I'm going to be covering all of the rest of the orchard and all of the rest of my fruit perennials and nut perennials and the bees and the poultry. So those will be pretty exciting, I hope. And I appreciate y'all watching my videos. I hope that you get something out of it. I know, again, I've said I get a lot out of being able to make videos for people. I feel being stuck at home this summer, this gives me a way to connect with other gardeners, and it gives me a way to continue to share my 20 plus years experience in permaculture, even though folks can't come to our property, and it gives me an outlet. So I really get a lot out of it. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. And I am going to let y'all go for the day, and happy gardening. Stay safe wherever you are. I'll be back tomorrow.